This week on the Wheelhouse. Cannabis. Social equity. And illicit use. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. It's a show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. As of last year, cannabis, or marijuana, is legal to purchase for recreational use in Connecticut. Today, we're checking in on how it's going so far. Is the cannabis industry equitable? How will the Biden administration's reclassification of the drug change the landscape? And is the potency of cannabis being sold around here getting a little too intense? We're going to dive into all of those questions today. With me this morning, Jordan Fenster, Senior Enterprise Reporter for CT Insider. Good morning, Jordan.
Good morning.
And also joined by Natalie Furtick, Federal Cannabis Policy Reporter for Politico. Natalie, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So glad to have you guys on. We've had a great exchange in the past. This is going to be a great show. I'm excited for this one. Folks can join the conversation. Give us a call right now, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Natalie, you heard me use the word cannabis a lot. You can also use the word marijuana. There's some guidelines. I think NPR doesn't always allow you to use the word marijuana. Let's just talk about the phrase right off the jump. What should we be saying?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to say, right? So there's obviously a lot of history with the use of the word marijuana. There's racist history involved in there, but it's also the legal terminology for cannabis that is federally illegal, that has more than 0.3% THC in it per dry weight. All the rest of the cannabis that you might find in a store that's hemp derived is federally legal. So when I'm trying to specify between things that are legal and illegal on a federal level, I specify marijuana and hemp. But they're all cannabis. It's like squares and rectangles.
Hey, for recreational use, legal here in Connecticut, do you know how many states that makes in total, Natalie? Is something you're actively tracking, that number? I think when we did it, we were the 19th state. Any other states considering it as well?
Yeah, I think we're at 23. Honestly, it is increasing so quickly now that sometimes I have to go back and fact check myself. And I didn't do that before this show, but I'm pretty sure we're at 23. Ohio was the latest. And then we're also looking at this November, Florida is going to be voting on recreational cannabis use. So, that could be a really big state. It would definitely increase the number of people in America who are living in a state that has legal recreational marijuana. But we're already at over 50% of the country is now living in a state with that. So it's been a huge increase in the last 6 or 7 years.
And why is there this push to decriminalize it?
Well, you've got it coming from a lot of different motivations. Different states have different motivations. Some of them are coming at it from a really criminal justice focused perspective, which a lot of the states in the Northeast, like yourself, have come at it from that perspective. But then you also have states that are just saying we want to reduce the illicit market or we want more tax revenue. States like Florida are coming at it kind of from both because it's a ballot measure initiative, not a legislative initiative. So, it's the voters that are saying, let's get this on the ballot and let's make it legal and available.
So, Jordan, you're hearing what Natalie's talking about there. Jordan Nathaniel Fenster from CT Insider. You're hearing what Natalie's talking about there. What are Connecticut's motivations, do you think? And then can you just give us a general update of how things are going here in our landscape?
So I think Connecticut is similar, even though it wasn't a ballot initiative. I think she's hit the nail on the head in terms of it being an issue of revenue and an issue of criminal justice. I think there was a big push to allow it to make it available for medication purposes as well, and I think that still is going on. We just hired an ombudsman I think and maybe Natalie can correct me, this may be the first ombudsman in the state, a cannabis ombudsman, under the intentionally the goal of whom is to help medical cannabis patients and to ease the transition as we continue growing from a recreational standpoint. And they just, as we were talking about earlier, they just legalized or codified the hemp-derived THC seltzers in package stores specifically. Nowhere else, just package stores. And some other changes to help.
How did they do that? Was that a loophole of some sort?
It was. Cannabis is legal. Well, hemp-derived, 0.3% THC by dry weight is legal. Less than 0.3% by THC by dry weight is legal nationally. And so what places were doing was they were taking that THC and taking CBD and converting it into THC so that it's hemp-derived, not cannabis-derived, and infusing products with it, like seltzers, things like that. And they popped up last year in package stores, and they got around any limits by changing the number of servings per can. So that was the loophole that they were exploiting. And rather than, and I know there was some movement among legislators to keep any THC product in our regulated and licensed retailers. But they allowed it, the package stores only, to sell THC infused seltzers now, hemp-derived THC infused seltzer.
And Connecticut is a limited license state. What does that mean? Tell me what limited license state means.
It means there is a limited number of licenses statewide. If you go to an unlimited license state like Massachusetts, you can find 5 or 6 cannabis establishments in the same town, across, on the same block even. I was up in Provincetown a few months ago, and you can go from retailer to retailer to retailer and compare prices. In Connecticut, there's a limited number of licenses available in the state. And they've been handing them out bit by bit.
Well, was that designed a certain way? Was that designed with social equity in mind, or did they just think that would allow folks to get behind cannabis more, or at least legalization?
I would say there were 3 reasons. One, they want people to get, they wanted sort of the culture to be more comfortable with the idea over time. They definitely wanted it to help grow the social equity. They gave first dibs to social equity producers, and they wanted them to have an opportunity to grow their businesses. And they also wanted to allow the market to grow bit by bit, slowly, without oversaturating the market immediately. I think those were the intentions anyway.
White House recently addressed cannabis decriminalization. Here's actually on the federal level, I believe marijuana is illegal, the term that they use there. Here's President Joe Biden in a video tweeted out 2 weeks ago.
This is monumental. Today, my administration took a major step to reclassify marijuana from a Schedule I drug to a Schedule III drug. It's an important move toward reversing long-standing inequities.
Strong words from the president there, Natalie. But for context, let's consider that marijuana remains illegal at the federal level. Is that going to change anytime soon?
There is currently no plan that would that is likely to move quickly that would change the actual criminalization of marijuana at the federal level. President Biden's plan would reclassify it, would move it to a less strict level on the Controlled Substances Act, but that would not change the fact that marijuana possession is still illegal. Like, you couldn't go to an illegal state like Texas and suddenly be able to buy marijuana. And if you take cannabis across state lines from a legal state to an illegal state, that would still be drug trafficking. A lot of the rules would stay in place.
Help me with Biden addressing people of color. They're impacted by the inequities of this criminalization. Is there at least that effort? Is that genuine? Do you think they're going to be able to take those steps at the federal level to reclassify marijuana?
Well, they've already they're already halfway through the process of reclassifying marijuana. But what people need to realize is that reclassifying marijuana does not change the federal criminal code, which is a separate law and specifically states marijuana in the federal criminal code. So Congress would need to remove marijuana from the criminal code in order to remove the federal penalties from it. There is some discussion over if declassification would also do the same thing. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to try to parse those out. But reclassification does not change the federal criminal code at all. So what the president has done instead is he has issued some pardons for people who have low-level cannabis-related offenses like possession or minor sales, things that did not involve a weapon. But you have to remember, most cannabis convictions are not at the federal level. They're at the state level. Federally, you've got maybe less than 10,000 convictions that this applies to. The White House gives a slightly higher number, but on the state level, you've got hundreds of thousands of people nationally who are still arrested for cannabis possession in states all around the country. So every year, to be clear. So that's where the majority of criminal cases are. And so it's really up to the states to deal with those. Like you were talking about, Connecticut has done with, I think it was called the Clean Slate program. It's programs like that where the president also encouraged, as part of his October 2022 announcement, he said, hey, governors, please take this action in your own states, because it's really, governors have more power to do this to state convictions than he does.
How is Clean Slate going in Connecticut? Or at least, Jordan, at least help me understand how the effort to reverse the drug wars, the impact on people of color disproportionately in the 80s and 90s on criminalizing drugs, including marijuana.
Well, to be honest, I'm not boned up on that. The last I heard, there was 65,000 people still waiting for their convictions to be erased. That was in March, I think, or maybe April. So it's probably worth a follow-up to see how far we've gotten since then.
What about with the Social Equity Council? How's things going there? And I guess that, and then providing license to not only sell but also grow.
Yeah, there has been for about a year or more. There were only 4 producers in cannabis cultivators, growers in Connecticut, and those were the 4 largest. Some of the largest companies in the country: Curaleaf, Verano, Theraplant, and they opened up some more licenses. They allowed. We now have 6 producers, I think. 1 outdoor grow, Rodeo. We're with more coming up, and they very shortly. And then they opened up this year. They changed the law a little bit to make it easier for growers to open up, including people on Native American reservations, people who they allowed people in social equity. So, for example, Bridgeport is, you might have a lot of folks who qualify for social equity cultivator licenses who live or grew up in Bridgeport, but to find land in Bridgeport for a grow site is going to be more difficult. It's packed tight. And so that changed this year. They are now allowing cultivators who qualify for social equity licenses to grow outside of those DIA areas, those social equity areas.
While you were talking, I was looking up Clean Slate. Thank you for that context on social equity in the council. While you were talking, I looked it up and I saw that article that Jaden wrote in March. Jaden Edison, he wrote this in March that you were referencing. And there was also an article from your colleague at CT Insider, Alex Putterman. And they have announced twice that there was going to be the Clean Slate. There was one, obviously, around the new year in 2023. And then at December, as I mentioned earlier, of this past year, 2023. But as Alex and Jaden have reported, full implementation once again delayed, something like as much as 80,000 people, perhaps. And the state may argue that point, and we'll have to follow up on that for a future show. But they've estimated maybe under 50,000, but some advocates have said it's higher than that. So that is where it is. On a national scale, Natalie, Are people of color opening cannabis-related business? Is this a business venture that's accessible for all folks? Or are we getting these large companies that were around when, say, Colorado legalized or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got both. I think that when I talk to, organizations and nonprofits that are really promoting people of color getting into the industry, they've all told me, there's not enough. There's not enough, that the industry is still disproportionately white, and that one of the biggest problems here is that cannabis doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within the structures that already exist in the United States of America. And I mean, name to me, how many small towns have we seen lose their bookshop because Barnes and Noble came to town, or Amazon, and then Barnes and Noble closed because Amazon was online. So you've always got that tension between large companies that you mentioned and small businesses. But then often when you're looking at people who are qualifying for and getting social equity licenses, they are getting that because their family was harmed by the war on drugs. Maybe someone in their family went to prison. So you're also seeing the economic impact of the war on drugs on their family. And then they're trying to get into an industry where small business loans are not usually available from banks, where venture capital often is based on relationships, and a lot of these people don't have those existing relationships that maybe a white man from California who had been previously involved in other business ventures knows the venture capitalist to help him fund his cannabis business. So in states all across the country, you're seeing just the general barriers to small business ownership holding people of color back, even when they get the equity licenses.
This is a great show on the intersection of policy around cannabis, the federal bans on marijuana, and politics here. We've been accepting your calls at 888-720-9677. We also got an email to wheelhouse@ctpublic.org. This person, Eileen in Groton, thank you so much for reaching out to us, Eileen. I'm a CT MMP medical cannabis patient. Since legalization of adult use cannabis and CT, the medical side has suffered product loss and price increases. It seems to me that the focus is on THC content. That's it. I'm very concerned about producers' use of remediation of plant material without notifying patients, customers of this very common practice. Thank you so much for reaching out to us, Eileen. Jordan, you can address that if you'd like. If not, you could also talk about what you mentioned earlier with Connecticut very recently hiring its first ever cannabis ombudsman and the rarity of that kind of a position.
Well, I mean, Eileen, is that her name? Is correct?
Yes.
Exactly correct. There's sales of medical cannabis have decreased month after month. Prices have pretty much stayed stable, but the availability of products has decreased. There's significantly a smaller range of products that medical patients can buy in stores. I think my guess is, I can't speak for them, but my guess is that the producers and the retailers are making more money off of there's a larger retail base for recreational, and so that's where their focus has been. The hope is that cannabis ombudsman will affect that change. I do want to go back, if that's okay, and I wanted to ask. I wonder if reclassifying cannabis will affect the willingness of banks to allow those small business loans, for example. And in Connecticut, you can't use a credit card to buy cannabis because the credit card companies have been skittish. So you have to use cash or debit. And I wonder if reclassifying cannabis is going to allow banks to feel more comfortable in that regard. And I also wonder what's if I can ask Natalie a question. What's going to happen with the farm? What's going to happen with the farm bill? I heard that that's going to change things.
This is Jordan from Fairfield County, Connecticut, asking a question to Natalie out there. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's comes with the territory, if you know what I mean.
No, completely. And let me really quick just address what Eileen said, just because I think it's important, and it's something that I've written about in multiple states, that when recreational legalization happens, a lot of the focus shifts to recreational consumers, just because they're, like you said, a larger market. If you're trying to keep your business afloat, you're going to try to provide the types of products that the majority of the people coming into your business want. But for people who are suffering from really severe things, or, I've talked to a lot of parents who use cannabis for their children who have severe seizure disorders or things like that. The loss of product is alarming for them. And so I think it's something that a lot of states have had to kind of figure out and sort out where medical patients can still get the things that they need. And obviously Connecticut is now having to go through those growing pains. So Congress and reclassification. So start with reclassification. I've talked to different banks about this. I've talked to financial experts. There's some sense that perhaps it could make a couple more banks feel comfortable. Remember, it's not illegal right now for banks to serve the industry. They just have to do a lot of paperwork to serve the industry in order to make sure that they are FDIC compliant. They're not losing their federal insurance as a bank to prove they're not money laundering, because that's what all this worry is about, is, are these cannabis businesses money laundering? So cannabis businesses have to pay a ton of money when they can find a bank or a credit or a credit union. And then the banks have to do a lot of extra paperwork. So as time goes on, as there are more states that legalize cannabis, banks are on their own just getting more comfortable with it. Every little change is likely to make some more banks a little more comfortable with it. But the big change that a lot of banks are still asking for is this bill in Congress. We call it just the Cannabis Banking Bill. It's had a couple different names: the Safe Banking Act, the Safer Banking Act. And Chuck Schumer, the majority leader of the United States Senate, has said he really wants to pass it. Can Congress, get their lives together to actually get it done in this Congress? I do not know. But that would also, literally, this is my entire job, and I don't know. It could go either way. But that would reduce the paperwork, essentially, is what that bill does. It reduces the paperwork. So more banks would get into it, but it wouldn't just completely make it completely fine for all banks. So the answer is maybe. Reclassification is new and totally new territory, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of lawyers currently arguing over what could happen or what won't happen, and we're just going to have to get into it and see what happens when it finally takes effect. Your other thing though, hemp,
and really quickly, because we're up against the break, if you can.
Oh yeah. So Congress actually last week, I was in this committee, they moved to close the loophole that just allowed those beverages that you guys just allowed in Connecticut. This was just a House committee hearing. It was not the entirety of Congress passed this bill, but that in itself is probably going to slow some of the investment in that kind of product. And if it does actually pass as part of the Farm Bill, I don't know if Connecticut would probably have to take them out of their shops or start to classify them under the cannabis program instead of the hemp program. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with that.
We got to take a break here, but when we come back, have you ever mistaken a bag of edibles for a bag of candy? And do you buy your cannabis in Connecticut, or do you make the trek up to Massachusetts? Going up north might just save you some money. More on that after the break. We're taking your cannabis questions now at 888-720-9677. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Today we're talking about all things cannabis, how the market is going in Connecticut, and we're also talking about marijuana at the federal level. We're also talking about equity efforts and what changes we can expect to see in coming years. I'm joined by senior enterprise reporter at CT Insider, Jordan Nathaniel Fenster, and Natalie Furtick, federal cannabis reporter for Politico. You can join the conversation. Please give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. If you're, phone shy or you just don't want to talk this morning, maybe your voice is a little raspy, something like that, send us an email, wheelhouse@ctpublic.org. Jordan, one thing we keep hearing is concern that the packaging on gummies and certain edibles is looking more and more like candy. We do have to kind of clarify, it's not exactly that all cannabis, or at least legal cannabis, is coming in some kind of wild packaging. It's probably the illicit stuff, right?
Absolutely. Connecticut has been really careful to keep packaging sold in licensed retail outlets as bland and boring as possible. And I imagine, I think some of the retailers have, not been as happy with that as they might. I think they'd like to be able to make their packaging a little flashier. What you're seeing in CBD shops and some CBD shops and other places, smoke shops, is the illicit stuff, the stuff that's derived from hemp that we were talking about earlier. And that is designed, at least the Attorney General has said, that it's designed to attract children, that it's designed to look like other products. And his office has been going after those products and those retailers.
Let's hear from Tong here. Connecticut Public Radio senior health reporter Sujata Srinivasan has been following regulation efforts in Connecticut, and she spoke to Connecticut Attorney General William Tong after he promoted this release of a new public service ad targeting illicit cannabis products. I'm giving you some context because this clip is sort of short. He says his office needs more power to enforce rules requiring state residents to buy cannabis in the regulated market. Those rules stipulate the removal of illicit products off shelves and getting illegal sellers to pay fines.
But they're civil enforcement actions, and we could use more help from the criminal authorities and potentially more robust criminal penalties in our laws.
What else can you tell us about what Tong's trying to do, Jordan?
Well, I guess it was more than a year ago now that we first started writing about these illicit products, these hemp-derived THC products, at the time I asked a bunch of different agencies who was responsible for policing it, and the answer was that there wasn't really somebody responsible for policing it. So I think Tong is probably correct that they could use some assistance from the law enforcement side. And Connecticut did strengthen those laws now this year to make that easier for local law enforcement to do and for state officials to enforce those as well.
Is it the wild, wild west outside of Connecticut, Natalie, in terms of these hemp-derived THC products, or is it a little more regulated than it is here?
No, it's the Wild West. And this is part of why Congress is even talking about closing the loophole. Certain states have fully banned them. Some states have not issued any regulations on them whatsoever. You've got all kinds of different products, some that are Farm Bill compliant and others that are just wilding. I also, I want to take the opportunity to point out to people that there's also a lot of counterfeit packaging out there. It's pretty easy to print something onto a package. So when you see something that says it's been tested or says it's one thing or another, and you're not getting it from a licensed shop that must be tested to stay in business, I'd be very skeptical of it. Like something I see sometimes in DC and in New York City is packaging that has a little California exclamation point logo on it. And while some of that we know is coming from the legal California market and was tested in California, I know the state is also really worried about counterfeit packaging. So some of that may not be coming from California at all. So it's really the Wild West out there with hemp and cannabis. And, I think people also don't realize that something like Delta 8 or Delta 10 can make them feel high. And, so they consume it and then try to go about their daily lives and then become intoxicated. And, there's safety issues there. And the nation's in a learning curve right now. I think we have to kind of think like, what happened after prohibition and how long did it take people to really figure out what was safe and what was good?
Is there any concern though, and I'll close the loophole on this one. Is there any close the loop on this one? Is there any concern that that kids are getting in on cannabis sold legally to adults? Is there any concern about that? Even some of these gummies that are coming to folks here in Connecticut, at least in like medicine bottles rather than flashy packaging. I think there's some concern. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think there's some concern, but it's minimal from the licensed regulated market. I think the real concern, as Natalie was saying earlier, is the fake products that are designed to look like others. I'm sorry, Natalie, please go ahead.
Oh, no, I think what you said is completely true. You know, one of the biggest problems that we're seeing is that these hemp products can be sold in gas stations and grocery stores and corner markets, and it's not, someone referred it to me as age gating, which, is making sure that the people are above 21 when they buy these products. So that's the biggest worry. That's where it's really easy for teenagers to just get something that does have intoxicating substances in it, is like a hemp-derived product in a grocery store or in a gas station that nobody is required an ID from.
The BBC.
Funnily enough,
yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
I was just going to say there is a concern of dogs eating cannabis. I recently reported that there's a significant increase in the number of stoned dogs eating other people's weed, eating their owner's weed.
I shouldn't laugh because that could be very dangerous. But you said stoned dogs, so I'm blaming you for it.
Well, it's true, and believe me, the symptom of a stoned dog is that they can't control their bladder. So it's not very pleasant.
BBC.
Yeah, that's actually been a problem in a lot of other places too.
So let's be very careful. So if Rocket is going to the bathroom a little too much, then there may be an issue with where you placed your cannabis, or maybe your hemp-derived THC, your Delta 8, as it were. The BBC recently said that in America, for the first time, more people are using cannabis on average in a given day than alcohol. Is there any context around that, guys?
Well, we're seeing the younger generation, Gen Z and millennials are swinging more toward cannabis use than alcohol use. And I think some of it has to do with fears about alcoholism, impact on liver. It's the same. There's also a lot less smoking of, cigarettes among millennials and among Gen Z. It'll be interesting to see how that impacts, what different health impacts come from cannabis as time goes on, as, people who are regular users go through medical studies and things like that. But, I think it also is having an impact on federal policy, because we're seeing President Biden come out with this rescheduling order. And while I don't know that he is doing it solely because of the election, the timing of a lot of his announcements, October 2022, for example, just a month before the midterms, leads us to believe that, there's some political calculus in this, and younger voters like Gen Z tend to also be polling the lowest for President Biden, that they are not happy with the job he's doing. So I know that there's some hope in the national political sphere that this will attract some of those voters, who are also the people that you mentioned are the more common users now, are using it more than alcohol.
So let's think about this now. This report from the BBC saying that more Americans are using cannabis on average per day than alcohol. What does that mean for the market, Jordan? Are a lot of people buying legal for recreational use cannabis, or are they buying it on the illegal market? Or what do the numbers tell us? Is there a strong market here?
I think there's a strong market. I don't have data for the illicit market, or what people are calling now the legacy market, which I just love.
The legacy market, yeah.
Yes. So I don't have data on the illicit market, but I'll tell you, I'm in Stamford. But you up in Hartford, you might very well go up to Massachusetts. And so that data is not captured either by the state. So I think the market is pretty strong here, although sales have been decreasing slowly month over month for the last few months. I think, prices have been relatively high. And so while the market is strong, I think it probably could be stronger.
Every month in the first year, it went up from the previous month in terms of revenue. I was trying to look up the latest data, but I'm not able to do so right now. But that was for the first year. That was at least true here in Connecticut. Just the last question here in this segment before we go to a break. Is there anything else that you want to say, Natalie, about this push to maybe either legalize marijuana federally or at least how states are looking at cannabis?
Honestly, you've asked me a lot of really great questions. I don't have anything left on the table right now.
Thank you so much. That makes me feel good because I love your reporting and we love having you on the show. And now I get to gush about you. But thank you so much for coming on, Natalie. Thank you, Jordan Fenster, as well, for coming on. Coming up, we're switching gears a little. We're lucky enough to have Jeremy Hobson, host of the live radio call-in show, The Middle, joining us today. We're going to talk to Jeremy about his show and an exciting event coming up next Monday in Waterbury, Connecticut. I'll be there, too, so we can shake hands, something like that before the show. You can get tickets now, actually, to The Middle, ctpublic.org/The Middle. If you're local and looking for something fun to do, you'll want to stick around until after the break to hear more about this live taping of The Middle happening on June 3rd in Waterbury. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Another show, The Middle, is a live call-in radio show that shines some light on the perspectives of folks who fall somewhere in the middle of the political spectrum and folks who live in the middle of the country. You may have heard it live on Connecticut Public Radio's Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Or like me, you catch the podcast. Joined by the show's host now, Jeremy Hobson. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Jeremy.
Frankie, great to be here.
It's great to hear from you. I'm always hearing you on the podcast, but now you're on the show. If folks want to join the conversation, they could call 888-720-9677. Connecticut, like Cincinnati or some other towns that I've recently heard that have joined in picking up The Middle.
Yeah, and Dallas this week. We add Dallas, which I was just looking up, is the fourth largest metro area in the country.
You're in the Metroplex now.
We're very happy about that.
Hey, folks who are new to The Middle, give us a little preview of the show. What subjects do you tackle and what can listeners expect to hear?
Yeah, so we are a live national call-in show focused on bringing the voices of people in the geographic, political, and philosophical middle into the national conversation. As I say it, the people who are so important in our politics but are so often ignored by the media. I mean, I think if you think about this coming election this November, it's probably going to be decided by states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and, Georgia and Arizona, Minnesota, states that are not all over the news all day long, like people that, if you turn on the TV news, it's always New York and Washington. Maybe there's somebody in California. But the idea of this show is to bring those geographic middle people into the conversation, but also to bring people who are in the political middle, who are that, 1, 2, 3%, or even sometimes as much as like 30% of the middle of the political spectrum, who actually really think about things on a issue by issue basis and make a decision, and will end up probably deciding who's in charge in this country after the election in November. And then there's one more definition of the middle that I want to put out there, which is meet in the middle. I think there's so much of our media now is so focused on the extremes, or you just watch or listen or read stuff that you already believe, and you're not actually hearing other views. And I think one of the amazing things about the United States is that we've got all of these people from different places with different views coming together and meshing with each other. And we need to do more of that in media and allow people with different views to have a civil conversation about the big issues.
How is the show connecting to you? How is Jeremy Hobson connected to The Middle? Where are you from, Jeremy?
Well, I'm from Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, which is most certainly the middle. I mean, it's a place, it's a college town in the Midwest, but it's also, if the wind blows from the right direction, it just smells like cow manure in the town. so I definitely grew up there. And, I have my parents, both immigrants, and were at the University of Illinois. But so we're very plugged into what was going on in the world, but never really talked about politics. And I think so many people in this country do not spend every waking minute thinking about politics and the political implications of every single thing that happens. They just want to like live their lives and make sure that their kids get to school and make sure that there's food on the table and all that stuff. And I think that's the kind of house that I grew up in. And I think in many ways, this just over politicization of every single thing is a turnoff for so many Americans.
Shout out to Urbana. Shout out to the University of Illinois, Urbana. We recently had Ned O'Gorman on the show. He's a professor of communication there, and he was terrific on our rhetoric show. Hey, I think you got into it a little bit there, but are you finding that there's a refrain from people not living on the coasts? Are they maybe feeling ignored or stereotyped, especially in this election year? Is there some kind of refrain that you're picking up here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we do way too much stereotyping of people across this country and say, oh, well, if they're in that state, then they must think this. I mean, let's think about, the 2022 midterm election, which is when we started the middle. We piloted it over 4 weeks around the 2022 midterms. I would say, looking back at that election, that one of the most important single events leading into that was the abortion referendum in the state of Kansas, where they overwhelmingly approved abortion rights in one of the most red states in the country. That to me is a breaking of a stereotype.
As well, yeah.
Yes, that is a breaking of a stereotype that how could that have possibly happened in Kansas? And I think one of the reasons that was such a shock to the media and to people around the country is that the media doesn't really spend very much time talking to or listening to people in the state of Kansas. And so one of the things that I'm so excited about with the middle is that we do have people, and you've heard it on our show, they're calling in from all over the place every single week. We're having people in Wisconsin and people in Texas and people in Florida and people in Utah and somebody in like a farm in Idaho, and they're all taking part in an intelligent way in these big issues.
You actually did an episode of The Middle on cannabis legalization.
Yes.
And how it's going nationally. Talk to me about some of the major takeaways that came out of that show. Give me something.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and you talked about it in this hour, is the potency. I don't think a lot of people realize just how much more potent the cannabis that you can buy at a dispensary in so many states is than it used to be. I think we used the number like it was, in the 1980s. If you were smoking weed in the 1980s, it might be like 2-3% THC, and now some of these products are 90% THC, which is just way more than that. And the other big takeaway, I think, was that the industry has grown so quickly and it's been legalized so fast. I mean, your guest said, it's hard to even fact check how many states are legal now because it's all in the last 10 years. We've gone from like just a handful to now like about half the states have legal recreational. And that the industry has been allowed to grow very quickly without very much sort of thought about how that's going to happen, and are the big companies getting too much power versus the smaller? Are we giving the kinds of dispensaries the ability to blossom that we want to, as opposed to just letting some massive corporation in and let them do everything the way that they want? And then the other piece that I think is really important is we're marketing these gummies. And, I said on the show, full disclosure, I enjoy the occasional weed gummy.
Yeah.
Okay?
You're like there's this new thing with the host that David Plotz did this on the Political Gab Fest where we're telling on ourselves about cannabis use.
Yeah, well, look, so I think that's important to do. I'm not sitting here going, let's make a bunch of marijuana jokes as we go through this hour. No, it's something that a lot of people do, and I think if you walk into a dispensary in this country today, you're going to see people in business suits, and you're going to see old people and young people. But I think one really important thing is the way that some of these edibles are packaged. Really, we're going to look back at this and say, what are we, crazy? We're making these for kids, even though kids are exactly who are not supposed to be using these because their brains are not fully developed. And that's what our guest said to us. It's like, we've got to start, treating these things like what they are, which is a substance that really you need to think about. If you're going to be using it, it shouldn't be for children.
This potency question is so important. You're talking about big business. We're talking about equity. This is very important as well. You got a live call-in show. Anything can happen, just like here on the Wheelhouse, including just great calls, man. Here's Jeremy's exchange with a caller from Tampa, Florida, named Javon. They were talking about an effort to legalize cannabis for recreational use in the Sunshine State.
Are you going to be voting for legalization recreationally this November?
Yes, I will. I think the criminal charges that people are facing for recreational use, the harm that does to our communities are tremendous. I think overall legalization is a better path than criminalization. People are going to smoke pot. You know, keeping it illegal is just going to continue to feed into a criminal justice system that disenfranchises Black and brown and poor people.
Give me some more perspective and voices that you're hearing on the show, Jeremy, from what you've heard, the topics that you think will be important this year. I really enjoyed your show on cities. I just heard the Memorial Day one that just came out.
Oh, yeah.
Give me some more perspective here.
I mean, we've done so many different topics, and we have so many sort of lined up. As you've promoted, thank you for doing that. We're going to do a show live from the Palace Theater in Waterbury, Connecticut. That we're going to tape on Monday. Most of our shows are live on the air, but we thought let's not try to do too much at once, where we're doing a show in front of an audience where Tolliver, our DJ, is going to be performing live music and also broadcasted across the country live at the same time. Let's just do one thing at a time. So we're doing a show on Monday, and the topic is, how do you take the politics out of climate change, which is going to be really interesting. And the people who are going to get to interact, since we're not going to be live across the country when we actually record that show, are going to be the people who are in the audience. So if you want to be a part of that conversation, go to ctpublic.org and get your tickets. After that, let's see. We're going to do a live special right after the presidential debate on June 27th, where we get reaction from around the country, a late show at 11 p.m. Eastern time that night. We are going to do a show about phone addiction and what people are doing if they feel that they are addicted to their phone, which I'm guessing literally every single person listening to this is, and what they're doing to try to deal with that phone addiction. We are talking, we've done shows about abortion. We've done shows about inflation. We've done shows about artificial intelligence. We're just trying to really get to a lot of the big topics that are going on. And this week we're doing one about how the war in Israel and Gaza might affect your vote this November.
DJ Tolliver is going to be in the house in Waterbury at the Palace Theater.
In Waterbury, yes, and with his band. He's going to be full on Paul Schaefer, Questlove going, on the stage. It's going to be really, really, really fun.
Are we going to hear Bouillabaisse?
We are, which was in Abbott Elementary. It was in the finale of Abbott Elementary. Tolliver is blowing up as a star, and we are glad that we got him before he is going to cost me too much money to come on the show every week.
Oh my God. Let's hope that Tolliver's there on June 3rd, and it sounds like he will be. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I can't wait to meet you in Waterbury
you too.
This Monday.
Thank you so much.
That was Jeremy Hobson, radio journalist and host of The Middle, national live call-in radio show that you should definitely tune into if you want some good insight into how people in the middle, geographically, politically, are thinking about the issues this country is facing. You can hear the show live on Connecticut Public Radio Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. And again, if you're in the area and want something fun to do on Monday night, June 3rd, 7 p.m., buy your tickets at ctpublic.org/themiddle, ctpublic.org/themiddle for the live taping of the show featuring Ryan Hanrahan from NBC Connecticut and White House National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy. That's all we got today. Great show produced by Chloe Wynn, edited by Wheelhouse executive producer Katie Tolarski. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Thanks to Tess Terrible for helping us in studio. Download the Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.